A faint cry carried across the dry basin, sharp but brief, like air caught in the throat. It came again, softer this time, just as Ranger Daniel paused near a patch of earth disturbed by recent collapse. He stepped slowly, squinting toward the cracked ridge where a burrowed den once held shape. Now, only a shallow slump remained, its edges broken and dust-blown. He crouched low. The soil was still fresh. Wind hadn't covered it yet. That meant it hadn't happened long ago. Beneath the edge of the fallen wall, something shifted, barely more than a breath's worth of motion. He leaned closer. The body was small, curled tight, ribs faintly rising beneath the dust. A lion cub. No more than a few weeks old. Its fur clung to its sides in dry clumps, face smeared with dirt. One paw twitched. Then stillness again. Daniel moved only his hand at first, letting it hover close to the cub's flank. No reaction. Just warmth. Just shallow, uneven breath. He looked around. No adult tracks circled the den, no sign of a recent lioness. Only distant wildebeest droppings, a few hornbill feathers and broken thorns along the flat. If the collapse separated this cub from its mother, she wouldn't have returned, or couldn't. The ground showed no struggle, no fresh scent trails. It had likely been alone since the early morning. With temperatures rising and no shade to shield the body, the risk was immediate. Without intervention, the cub would not survive the next hour. Daniel reached for the radio clipped to his belt and whispered, "One cub, around 3 weeks, breathing weak, no adult signs, possible den collapse." The reply was quick and clear. Mobile unit en route, 25 minutes. He kept the radio near but let it fall silent. His focus narrowed again on the cub. A low tremble passed through its leg. The head turned faintly toward the sun, eyes sealed shut by grit. He didn't move it yet. Lifting a cub, even one this small, could cause trauma or injury if internal damage had occurred during the collapse. So he waited, sat cross-legged beside it. The only sound was wind pulling across the plain and the occasional tick of his watch shifting on his wrist. Then, after minutes that passed slowly as dusk, the cub made a sound. Not the call of hunger or pain, but something simpler. A breath that caught. Then another. Enough to try lifting its head, even for a second. That was the change. A visible action. The moment that shifted the plan from waiting to choosing. Daniel leaned in and with steady hands began to brush away the dirt from the cub's body. First the legs, then the chest, then the neck. He used 2 fingers to gently clear grit from around the nostrils. The cub sneezed once. Startled by its own sound, it flinched and curled tighter. But it was awake. That mattered. It meant the body was fighting. And if it was fighting, they could help. The vet team would bring fluids. They would stabilize first before touching anything more. But there was one risk that now pressed harder than dehydration. If the mother was near, she might return soon. And if she found him, a human, beside her cub, the encounter could turn fatal for both. Daniel scanned the horizon again. Nothing but dry air and the faint shimmer of heat above the stones. Still, the rules stayed the same. Every second increased the chance of her return. But every second the cub remained in the open also reduced his chance of survival. It was a balance. Wait for help or act alone. Daniel placed a steady hand beneath the cub's belly, lifting just enough to feel resistance. No limpness, no sharp cry. Then he placed the other hand beneath the rib cage. He lifted him carefully, slowly rising to his feet. The cub's head lolled once, then rested against his sleeve. No struggle. Only the soft weight of a life not yet gone. As he walked back toward the path, his footsteps light across the dust, the cub remained still, breathing, warm, and held close. There was no roar behind him, no shadow moving across the flat, only sun, wind, and the quiet weight of something that almost didn't survive the hour. The path into the inner scrub curved gently downhill, narrowing where the earth dried into layered crust. Daniel followed it on foot, cradling the cub close to his chest. The radio buzzed again, requesting coordinates, but he didn't reply. He couldn't stop. He knew this stretch of land, a shallow basin lions sometimes crossed in late afternoons. He'd seen prints there 2 mornings ago, near the watering ridge. That meant he was walking into known territory. But he also knew this cub would not survive another wait in the open sun. It was a decision made in silence. Not reckless, just real. Each step pressed light against the soil. His boots left clear marks in the powder. But the wind was already softening them behind him. The cub stirred once in his arms. No cry, just the faint shift of ribs pressing against his shirt. Its head turned slightly, nose twitching toward his sleeve. Then stillness again. The weight remained the same, fragile, uncertain, but present. He tightened his hold slightly, more instinct than thought. There were no visible tracks along the trail, no drag lines of a wounded lioness, no scuff of paws near the brush line. Only flattened grasses where antelope had passed. Daniel paused briefly near a low outcrop, scanning the dry bend ahead. If a lioness had circled back, she would likely come from the northeast, shaded trees with deep soil for resting. But the air was silent. Even the birds stayed low. He listened, waited, then continued. He passed the broken termite mound where a monitor lizard once nested. The cub stirred again, this time with a faint moan, not distress but disorientation. The body was still too warm. Heat trapped under its fur could turn quickly. Daniel reached the edge of a shaded thorn cluster and crouched. Slowly, carefully, he placed the cub on a bed of dry leaves beneath the acacia's outermost branch. Not in full shadow, not fully hidden, just enough to lower the body's strain and give him pause. He scanned the rise. Still nothing. He whispered, "Wait here," and rose. Just 20 paces ahead, an old wallow showed signs of caving in. That's where the den likely collapsed. He stepped wide of it, walking the perimeter. No adult prints. Only the crumbled edge of the den mouth and a few tufts of fur caught on thorns. Wind had done most of the damage. Likely overnight. The cub must have rolled or crawled free before full collapse. He circled back. The cub hadn't moved. Its eyes opened now. Slits, unfocused but tracking shadows. That mattered. He reached slowly, touched the shoulder. The cub blinked but didn't flinch. Trust wasn't the word. It was an absence of fear, dulled by exhaustion. He checked the limbs again. No swelling, no blood, no dragging marks. It hadn't been crushed, only buried. That meant time was still on their side, but not much. He lifted the cub again and stepped from the shade. Every part of this risk was calculated. He knew the rules. A returning lioness could appear without sound. If he turned his back at the wrong moment, or startled her near the den, she'd defend without hesitation. But there had been no scent marks, no scat, no trail of pacing. She wasn't nearby, or she wasn't returning. Both meant one thing. The cub's chance of survival depended entirely on what happened in the next hour. As he climbed back toward the emergency track, the one the vet vehicle would use, the cub shifted again. This time, a paw lifted, weakly brushing the collar of his jacket. Daniel slowed his steps. The path curved, revealing the red-dusted flat near the outpost's southern gate. No truck yet, just open land, heat rising in bands. He stopped, glanced behind. Still no movement. Still no mother. There was nothing else to wait for. The choice had already been made. He crossed into the clearing, fully exposed. One man, one cub, moving slowly against the wind. Daniel shifted his grip gently as he reached the flat. The cub's body, no heavier than a bundled jacket, rested against his forearm with barely a twitch. Its fur, streaked in pale dust, held the scent of dry earth and sun. No sound escaped its throat, no claws tensed. Just slow breath, uneven and shallow, warming the space between Daniel's hands. It was not lifeless, but it was closer to slipping than staying. Every second ahead now mattered more than the last. The radio cracked to life. Unit approaching from east, 5 minutes out. He pressed the transmitter once but didn't reply. The line crackled again. Ranger, Daniel, confirm location? Still no answer. His gaze held steady on the open trail ahead. The terrain was clear. No thorn traps, no loose stones, just hard-packed earth stretching toward the distant tree line. He pulled the strap of his bag tight across his chest, glanced once at the cub's face, then began to run. He didn't sprint. He paced himself. Long strides, smooth arms, careful not to jostle the fragile body. Each movement was measured. The cub's head bobbed slightly with the rhythm, but it did not stir. Its breath remained. That was enough. The air pulled dry through Daniel's lungs. Dust rose behind each step and settled fast in the heat. He ran along the ridgeline, where the breeze ran straighter and the ground dipped only once before the gravel crossing. At the halfway mark, his boot slipped briefly on a loose patch of soil. He caught his balance with a sharp exhale, pausing for the first time in nearly 2 minutes. The cub moaned, faint, like air pushed through a reed. It was the first sound since the den. Not pain, not protest, just breath made audible. Daniel steadied his arms again and resumed. He didn't speak. Words would change nothing now. The only language here was time. The mobile unit was not yet in sight, but he heard the faint hum beyond the western slope. Tires over gravel. Still a minute out. He reached the open bend near the southern fence where a thorn bush had once split the trail. It had been cleared last season, a decision made during drought to ease fire patrol. That gap now gave him the shortest route. He cut across the dry scrub, ignoring the thin branches that caught his leg. Thorns scraped once against his shin but didn't draw blood. He didn't slow. Up ahead, the wind shifted. A small swirl of sand lifted and rolled forward. It passed over them like breath over skin. The cub stirred again, a twitch in the paw, a pull at the corner of its eye. Daniel's grip adjusted, firmer but soft. His arm is a cradle. His steps are relentless. As the vehicle finally crested the hill, he didn't wave. The medics saw him first, a silhouette against the sun, running not from fear, but with purpose. They stopped without instruction. The rear doors opened. A figure jumped down, holding a gray pack. "Vitals?" the vet called out. Daniel didn't respond. He reached them seconds later, chest heaving, hands outstretched. Dehydrated, breathing but low. "No injury," he said between breaths. The vet didn't ask more. He reached into the pack, uncapped a small saline drip, and began the check. Daniel didn't watch. He stepped back, hands trembling slightly now that they were empty. The warmth had left his skin, but not his mind. It lingered. The shallow rhythm of life pressed between his arms. The way the cub had never once fought the hold. No wildness, no fear, just breathe, and the risk that came with carrying something that could not carry itself. The vet turned briefly. "Stable enough for now," he said. "But barely." He moved quickly, prepping the next injection. Daniel nodded, still catching his breath. He looked once more at the cub, now laid on a clean cloth inside the vehicle, a tube gently fixed to its flank. It hadn't died in the dust. Not yet, because one man had run. Inside the field outpost's exam room, the temperature held steady under the humming fans, but the cub's body remained warm to the touch. Daniel stood near the counter, arms folded across his chest, watching as the vet moved with practiced calm. The cub lay on a thin blanket lined with cooling packs, a drip taped gently to its leg. It hadn't cried, it hadn't stirred, just the slow lift and fall of its rib cage, shallow, effortful. "She's dehydrated," the vet said quietly, adjusting the line. "But that's not the worst of it." He placed a stethoscope over the chest, Listened, shifted, then listened again. There's something off in the lungs. Shallow and irregular. Could be an early infection. Could be heat damage. He reached for a thermometer, paused, then checked the gums instead. Dry, pale. She's on the edge of organ failure. Daniel nodded once. No question formed in his throat. He already knew. The cub had spent too long in the sun after the collapse. Hidden, immobile, her body had been shutting down before they even found her. Dehydration had only been a visible danger. The real threat was what couldn't be seen, what had already begun deep inside. The vet moved quickly now, preparing a second drip, a glucose mix. "She has a chance," he said, "but not a wide one. We'll need to watch her through the night. No movement without sedation. No sound is a good sign. Too much effort, and she'll slip." He glanced toward Daniel, his voice low. "If she makes it to morning, we reassess." They said nothing more. Outside, the day wore on, sky bruising faintly toward evening. The air beyond the compound was still. Only the rustle of dry branches now and then brushing the metal fence. Inside, the cub made no sound. Her eyes remained shut, her body too tired even to shiver. Daniel remained nearby, seated now, elbows on knees, watching the rise and fall of her flank, still breathing, still with them. Then, from a distance, a low sound broke the quiet. It was not windy, not the engine. A low, sustained rumble, deep and pulsing. The vet looked up sharply. Daniel stood. They moved toward the window slowly. Quietly, neither speaking. The rumble came again, louder now. A vibration more than a sound, carried in the dust just beyond the gate. The ranger stationed outside radioed in, voice hushed. "We've got movement in the west perimeter. One lioness, not close yet, just watching." There was a pause, a breath. "She's not pacing. She's waiting." Daniel stepped out through the shaded corridor that led to the gate. The compound itself was still. No raised alarms, no panic. Just the quiet knowledge that something had changed. He reached the edge of the fence and looked across the flat. She stood beyond the outer stones, half covered by dry grass and distance, still as bone. A lioness, alone. Her body held low, not in hunting posture but deliberate, measured. She did not move forward. She did not leave. Daniel lowered his radio. He did not raise his voice. She came back. The vet joined him, silent. They didn't speculate. They didn't name what was happening. But they knew the truth was possible. A mother had returned to a den already broken and found nothing. And now, drawn by scent, by sound, by something unspoken, she waited. Inside the clinic, the cub stirred once. A soft whimper escaped her throat. The first real sound since the rescue. Barely audible, but enough to notice, enough to matter. What came next could not be predicted. But the moment was clear. Something impossible had shifted. The cub was no longer just a patient. She was wanted. And just outside the gate, someone had come looking. The evening settled into a muted gold as the sun dropped behind the ridge, casting long shadows across the dusted compound yard. Outside the fence, the lioness moved again. Not fast, not loud, just a slow, deliberate circle. Her paws barely disturbed the soil. Her head stayed low, tail steady. Eyes focused not on the humans but on the scent that clung faintly to the air, the scent that had drawn her here. Daniel watched from the covered alcove near the outer gate. His radio hung quiet at his hip, the channel open but unused. No one spoke. A second ranger, Mira, stood beside him, her hand resting lightly on the gate's locking lever but not moving it. Inside, the cub remained on the exam table, monitored, breathing slow. But minutes ago, something had changed. A sound, faint but new, had escaped her throat. A call, not loud enough to carry far, just a broken note like memory returning to breath. The lioness froze when she heard it. Her shoulders rose slightly, ears locked forward. She didn't snarl, she didn't crouch, she just turned her head toward the clinic wall, where a gap in the canvas vent carried sound into the yard. For several seconds she remained perfectly still. Then a step forward, then another. The arc of her circling path bent inward, closer to the fence line now. Her chest expanded visibly with each breath, not labored but alert. "She's not challenging," Mira said quietly. Daniel nodded. "She's not here for us." There were no cubs with her, no others nearby. Just her and the trail she'd followed back to this point. Whether she had fled the collapse or returned too late to find her young was unknown. But the posture of her body, the steadiness of her gait, this was not the lioness of dominance or defense. This was the lioness of search, of loss not yet confirmed. Daniel stepped forward, slow and open. The lioness watched him briefly but did not flinch. Her tail flicked once, then she lowered her head and resumed her pacing, this time slower, tracing the corner of the gate. She moved toward the scent that clung faintly to the blood-stained cloth inside the ranger's shirt, the same shirt now hanging by the entrance after being removed in the heat of the clinic. The cub stirred again inside. Her front paw shifted slightly. One eye opened, unfocused but wet. She made no sound this time, but her chest rose a fraction higher. The vet leaned in, checking vitals, but didn't speak. He too had heard the earlier sound, and he too understood what it might mean now that it had drawn a lioness across miles of brush. Outside, the lioness stepped close to the outer chain. She sniffed once, backing her head slightly as the metal reflected the last of the light. Then she looked past it. Not at the people, not at the structure, just through it, toward the source of a smell that had once meant life. Her body remained still, but her eyes narrowed slightly. Not a threat, recognition. Inside the compound, no one moved. There were no rifles, no warnings. Just stillness, respectful, waiting. She made no effort to leap. She didn't press. She simply stood. And then, after one full minute, the cub's breath caught again. This time the sound came with it. Soft, cracked, but unmistakable. The lioness stepped back from the fence and sat. No one spoke. The wind passed low through the grasses, stirring dust across the yard. The lioness did not leave. She did not call out. She only waited. It was not the behavior of fear or confusion. It was not rage. It was something else. Something that came only when what was lost had not been forgotten, and had not yet slipped completely away. The decision was not made with certainty. It never could be. But after 30 minutes of stillness, of watching the lioness sit just beyond the fence without moving, without growling, without turning away, Daniel stepped toward the side gate with the radio pressed to his shoulder. The vet's voice came through clear. "She hasn't shown aggression. Vitals are stable. If we wait longer, we lose the window." Mira stood by the latch, eyes never leaving the lioness. "If she charges," she said, not finishing the thought. Daniel nodded once. "We step back. Let her choose." The gate mechanism creaked softly as the pins slid free. The hinges groaned against the dry air. A narrow gap opened. Not wide enough for a vehicle, just wide enough for a lioness. Then silence again. The lioness did not rush forward. She did not leap or roar. She stood slowly, shoulders rolling upward as if testing the weight of her own decision. Her ears remained forward, tail steady behind her. Then, with the grace only her kind carried, she began to walk. Not straight. Not fast. A soft arc along the perimeter, sniffing once at the fence post, then continuing. She passed the opening. Mira's breath caught. Daniel raised one hand, not to stop her, not to wave, just to acknowledge what was happening. The lioness turned inside the compound. Her pace slowed further. Body taut. Head low. She moved as if remembering the space. Dust rose under her paws in faint clouds. She did not look at the humans again. Her gaze fixed on the clinic door, still slightly ajar. Inside, the cub stirred. The vet stepped back. The drip line had been removed minutes earlier to give the body rest. The cub's eyes opened again. One foreleg shifted. The lioness reached the threshold and paused. No one moved. She leaned forward, nostrils flaring, and released one short huff, not loud, but heavy, a breath pushed with intention. The sound reached the cub. Her head twitched. She did not rise, but her mouth opened slightly in a shallow gasp, then closed again. The lioness took a final step inside. Her shoulders passed the threshold. Her body filled the space with presence, not power. She lowered her head inch by inch until her muzzle hovered above the cub's flank. Then, for a full minute, nothing moved. A sound, almost imperceptible, passed between them. Not from the cub, from my mother. A low rumble, deep in the chest, barely audible to those in the room. A sound of familiarity. A sound that reached beyond exhaustion. The cub blinked once. Her paw rose a few inches off the blanket and fell again. The lioness bent her head fully and licked the cub's ear. No reaction at first. Then, slowly, the cub's body pulled toward the warmth. It was not a dramatic reunion. No cries, no leaps, just gravity. One body leaning back toward what it remembered. The mother stayed still, watched, then licked again. The humans stepped back further. One pace, then another. The door remained open. The vet whispered, "Let her finish." Daniel nodded. Hands at his sides, chest still. This moment, born of risk and restraint, played out not with certainty but with quiet permission. The lioness had returned. Not with teeth or terror, but with patience. She had waited, she had entered, and now she has found it. The compound remained silent. Only the faint sound of breath and the soft touch of fur against fur marked what had changed. The light in the clinic had softened. The sun dipped just low enough to cast a gold line through the back windows, catching the stillness inside. The lioness remained beside the cub, her body crouched low, muscles steady but not tense. She hadn't moved more than a breath since she entered. No pacing, no growl, just presence. The cub's flank rose and fell, rhythm slow but no longer labored. Her eyes fluttered, lids fighting their weight. For a long stretch there was only breath between them. Shared air, shared scent, the quiet memory of what had nearly ended. Then, without warning, the cub lifted her head. Not far, not strong, but enough. Her chin hovered above the blanket, ears twitching faintly. She blinked once, unfocused, confused, then turned toward the massive paw in front of her. The lioness didn't react. She waited. Her eyes stayed locked on the cub's face, unmoving. The cub shifted again. Her front paw pushed weakly against the blanket. A drag, then another. Her body inched forward, scraping over fabric in silence. The effort showed in every part of her, in the slow stretch of neck, in the quiver of her ribs, in the way her claws barely left marks. But she kept going. She dragged herself forward until her head came to rest beside the lioness's paw. The lioness finally moved. One nudge, soft, the side of her nose brushing gently along the cub's shoulder. The cub responded with a low, broken sound. Not distress, not hunger, just response. She nudged again. Slower this time, pushing her muzzle beneath the cub's chest, lifting slightly. The cub didn't resist. She allowed herself to roll, just enough for the lioness to tuck her snout beneath the neck. Then, with care that defied her size, the lioness adjusted her jaws and took hold. Not biting, not pulling. A mother's grip. The scruff held loosely between her teeth, lifted just clear of the floor. The cub hung there, limbs slack, breath steady. Daniel watched from the doorway. He didn't step forward. No one did. Even the vet had moved back into the hall. This was no longer an intervention. This was a reunion. The lioness stood slowly, balancing the cub with practiced ease. Her body rose with a single motion, weight shifting backward as she turned toward the exit. The cub remained still in her mouth, head tilted sideways, tail limp but not dragging. She crossed the room in 3 steps. At the doorway, she paused. Outside, the last edge of sunlight caught the dust in quiet swirls. She stepped into it, body catching the glow, casting a long shadow that bent across the compound's edge. Her stride remained calm. No rush. No backward glance. Just the quiet certainty of movement that belonged to no one else. The cub stayed in her hold, not struggling. This was her choice. She had crawled forward, not toward humans or warmth or light, but toward a scent, a sound, a memory. She had chosen the paw that waited beside her. Behind them, the door stayed open. No words were spoken. None were needed. The lioness passed beyond the gate, the cub in her jaw. The wind shifted just enough to close the door softly behind them. At first light, the reserve was still. A soft breeze pushed against the acacia branches, brushing loose dust across the trail that led from the compound gate. The night had passed without sound. No growls, no calls, just silence, the kind that came not from absence, but from peace. When Daniel stepped out just after sunrise, the air carried the faint scent of lion musk, warm and recent. He crouched low beside the gate's outer path. There, in the loose earth, the prints remained, unmistakable. A wide forepaw followed by the smaller press of a second, barely half its size. The cub's feet had dragged slightly, one print overlapping the next, but they were paired, close, step for step. He followed them with his eyes as they curved east, toward the low ridge that led deeper into the brushland. The ranger station behind him remained quiet. The vet had checked the clinic once more before dawn and found it empty. The blankets undisturbed, the floor clean. No struggle, no blood, no chaos. The lioness had carried her cub out in silence, the way she had come in, as if she had always known the route. Daniel didn't speak. He walked a few paces along the trail, stopping where the ground sloped gently toward a dry stream bed. The prints turned there, skirting the edge of the reeds. A set of marabou storks shifted in the distance, but nothing else moved. The tracks continued into the trees, where light thinned and shadows grew longer. No one followed them. No collar would be placed. No dart, no observation tower. What had happened belonged only to those who witnessed it, and to the soil where the moment had passed. The cub, who had once fit into Daniel's arms like a fading breath, had made her final choice without command. She had heard the sound. She had reached for the paw, and when her mother took her gently in her jaws, she had not cried out. She had gone. Daniel stayed by the tree line for several minutes, eyes scanning the space where tracks vanished into foliage. There was nothing more to see, and yet everything remained. The dust along the bend still held the soft edges of the lioness's passage. The broken thorn at the gate still leaned where her flank had brushed it. He bent once, picked up a single tuft of fur caught in the fence post. Tawny, fine, the kind found along a lioness's shoulder, the part that had paused at the gate before she passed through. He turned it once in his fingers, then let it go. The wind carried it down the slope, out of sight. Behind him, the station began to stir. Radios clicked. Footsteps crossed the gravel. The day would begin again. But Daniel remained where he stood, watching, not because he expected to see her return, but because she had, and because the ground, in its quiet way, remembered. The trail told the story without words, of the cub that did not die, of the mother who waited, and of the hour when both were given back to each other. A few meters away, a lone hornbill called once, then silence. The tracks faded into the trees, and the moment stayed.